And we're
Okay,
ready when you are.
good. Well, so I'm past District Governor Gary King. I'm going to be the moderator for this session, and we're operating on the fly a little bit because Dr. Jean Clinton, who was going to be our first speaker who's from the Toronto area, uh, woke up with laryngitis this morning, and so it's hard in a Zoom conference to present if you have laryngitis. Um, So if you guys will give me a little bit of leeway, I will just tell you why I wanted Dr. Clinton to speak and just for a couple of minutes. I saw her speak at a conference of the International Women's Forum about 6 months ago about mental health issues for children. And there are just two or three things that I can remember that I didn't even have to write down because they were so important. But I think as kind of an old, Rotarian, and I thought during COVID, well, all those kids, they get on their screens, and they how could they be affected by COVID? And the important point is that our young people, and Dr. Clinton did a great job of explaining this, were significantly affected by the isolation created by COVID, and that it is a long-term issue for young people. And I think we as Rotarians and adults and parents need to be aware of the fact um, that young people have suffered from the isolation caused by COVID, and that it's not the kind of thing that we want our children to be resilient. And I think they will be resilient, but it's not the kind of thing that they can just snap out of in one day or one semester or something like that. It is an issue that we all need to be aware of. Um, we found a YouTube of Dr. Clinton giving some of that presentation, and we're going to post that link so that those of you who are interested in going deeper into that issue can go after the conference today or at some point in the future and look at her comments. And I've also asked her to send us a set of slides that she had from that presentation that I saw, and we'll try and post those as well. But this is a good start for this session, I think. Anyway, the thing that she said that struck me as something that my grandmother would have said to me, and I thought was so important is she said, if you wonder if you don't have children or if you don't know how children in your community are affected by COVID, the most important thing to remember is that all children are our children. And that if children are suffering in some way, even if it's not your own children, it's a community issue and something that we really need to deal with and be aware of. And so that was, for me, that was kind of the theme of this session, is to recognize that there are a lot of health issues that impact young people that we might not be very aware of, and we should get that way. So our next speaker is Jennifer Bryant, who is a registered dietitian. I haven't been going through people's bios line by line, but I was so impressed with the work that she's doing to try and help young people in particular. And Jen, I noticed last week on the news or a couple of weeks ago uh, that the American Society for Pediatrics or the American Diabetes Association has said that, for instance, that obesity in children is a much bigger issue than we thought it was, and it's much more important to be aware of that and address that. And I know you're probably going to talk about that as well as a few other things in your presentation, but that nutritional health for children is a very important issue. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I think you'll have about half an hour, and then if Jeannie King Beach is on, I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit about some issues in her hospital that she ran into during COVID, and then we'll have questions. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Gary. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen here so y'all can see some of my slides. And actually, that's a great introduction because I think one of the things that happens when we think about health is we tend to compartmentalize it, where we're just thinking about one issue or another. But really, when we think about overall health, everything is connected, right? So our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, all of it is connected. And so if we fail to think about one of these areas or another, then all of the other areas suffer, right? So it's important to kind of keep a holistic view of that. And especially with our children too, just mentioning the impacts of COVID and mental health. And one of the things that kind of fell by the wayside there was, activity, nutrition, all of these things, because they weren't necessarily survival issues at the moment. We were trying to just survive, right, for quite a while. And so the kids were trying to figure out school and all of these things. And I have two kids of my own. They are now they're 12 and 9. So COVID was tricky for us. My kids were little, they were trying to do school online, and there was definitely a propensity to just sit rather than move. And since we were stuck at home, there was more snacking and more things that they didn't necessarily need. So part of what I'm going to do today is look at how do we find balance with all of this, with the understanding that diets really don't work. There's so much research that goes behind that, where we're looking at people who go on a diet. This was a Harvard study that just came out in 2020. People who go on a diet, when they are 1 year out, their average weight loss is 3 to 4 pounds, and there is no change in what they did with their health. So we know that diets really don't work. So what I'm focusing on today is how do we actually feed our bodies well? What does overall nutrition for the lifespan look like? How do we do that in a way that actually benefits our health and our bodies? So that's where we're going today. Okay, so I love this quote. I saw this on social media maybe last year. So when you are 90 years old, do you want to look back on your life and think, I am so happy I spent so much time and energy trying to lose weight, obsessing about which foods are good and bad, and worrying about exercise? No, I don't think anybody would say that, right? So again, we're shifting gears here. We're looking at how do we find balance in treating our bodies well, taking care of our bodies, rather than following all of these fads and trends that we see happening in our culture. So I want to just kind of look at what are some of the physical and mental effects of someone who is on a chronic diet pattern. We're going to talk about some of these negative impacts. So number one, we see low energy, especially when people are yo-yoing. So January is actually a great time to talk about this, because what ends up happening is, people eat maybe not so well for November and December. And then in January, they're like, oh, I need to get back to it, And so they shift gears, and we end up in this all or nothing mindset when it comes to nutrition. And that's really not helpful either. Those yo-yo patterns create in us low energy. We see increased cravings, especially for sugar and carbs. And that is simply coming from two reasons, actually. Biologically, when we're not eating enough, our body biologically craves carbohydrates and sugars for more energy. That's just a natural thing that happens. And then second, psychologically, what happens is when we tell ourselves we can't eat X, Y, or Z foods, what do we end up doing? Well, we end up wanting those foods more and more, right? So there's two reasons that happens. We end up in overeating cycles, especially this one I see a lot happening with, people try to restrict throughout the day, maybe. So breakfast, lunch, maybe snacks, they're trying to, eat really healthy. And then at dinner time, they really haven't eaten enough throughout the day. And so their body ends up just really hungry and maybe with more cravings. And then people end up eating more at night. And then the next morning they say, oh, I'm going to do better today, right? And so we restrict and restrict and restrict during the day. And then we end up overeating at night. And that doesn't help anyone either. We see increased hunger. Over time, we see a decreased metabolism, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. So what we're really doing is we go on these diets hoping to lose weight, And what ends up happening is every time we go on a diet, our metabolism goes down and down and down. And so it's harder and harder to lose weight every single diet that we go on. Okay. Many people I see with chronic dieting patterns, they have this preoccupation with food and exercise. This goes back to my previous slide. That's not something that we want to spend all of our mental energy on. So that's not really healthy either. Generally, we're unhappy with our physical bodies, and this leads to low self-esteem also. We also tend to go into these diets with a sense that we will find happiness and worth if we lose weight. We know that that's not true. And then we end up having feelings of guilt and shame, or maybe even we feel like we're out of control when it comes to eating. So obviously there's so many negative physical and mental health effects. We really want to go back and say, no, we're not going to do a restrictive diet, but that doesn't mean that we can't change some behaviors. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. I wanted to show you, this is kind of what happens when somebody decides that they want to go on a diet. And this, this is a problem starting really early on. So just kind of emphasizing with the theme of the conference this year that young girls, they start to get ideas of going on diets, restricting calories as early as 7 years old. Okay. And much of this comes from the adult examples that they're seeing in their lives, maybe their parents, their teachers. So this is really important. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but what can we do to help these girls not get stuck in these cycles? Well, one of the things we can do is be good examples. Not talking about needing to lose weight or needing to cut out that food, or that food is bad, or calories are bad. I'll just share a quick story. We were in the car the other day, and I mentioned my daughter is 9. And her and her friend were in the back seat. They were talking about, I can't remember exactly what food it was. And her friend said, oh, that food has a lot of calories. And my daughter just sat there for a minute, and then she said, yeah, but calories are basically energy. So that's good, right? And I thought to myself, yes, that is a parenting win right there. I was so proud of her. But I was also shocked that her friend already has some of these ideas in her head, and they're 9. So I think that's a good takeaway is let's be good examples. Let's find that balance ourselves so that we can be good examples to our young people, our girls and our boys. So what happens? We get into this diet cycle. We get this idea that we need to go on a diet. This is something that has become more and more pervasive in our culture, especially with social media. The marketing is so good for this that we really need to be aware that this is happening. So we get this idea, so we start restricting certain foods or food groups. Depending on the diet, obviously will determine which foods and groups we are restricting. But what ends up happening is we basically are starving our body. We have more cravings. So that often leads to overeating, eating too much. Then we feel guilty. So we restrict the foods again, and the cycle just continues over and over. One of the things that happens metabolically when we do this is every time we starve our body, we do lose weight, right? We know that when we eat less than we burn, we do lose some weight. But what usually ends up happening is we're losing fat, muscle, and water. And then what happens when we eat too much and we regain it is we regain the fat and the water, but not the muscle. And so this is what's happening when I say our metabolism decreases over time. If we're continually losing a little bit of muscle every single time, that muscle is really what drives our metabolism. And so you can see that as we lose muscle, we lose our metabolism as well. Okay, so now that I've told you what not to do, what is the alternative? Okay, this is where my practice, Nourished Nutrition Counseling, really focuses on. So I help counsel people in how to make that mindset shift from doing all the diets to finding balance. So this is the alternative. So we change the focus. So instead of thinking about what we weigh or how we look, we change the focus to health and well-being. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this is comprehensive of physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. So we want to think about all of that together. And so taking that a step further, which foods actually make you feel good? Which foods make your body feel good? Where do you have energy? Where do you have mental clarity? And focusing on eating those types of foods most of the time will help you understand what is good for your body. Adopting an intuitive eating mindset. This is in my last slide, but I'll just show it here to you. This is one of my most favorite books. It's called Intuitive Eating. It's a wonderful book. I actually got it in college when I was in my nutrition program. One of my counseling professors gave us this book and we had to read it. And then we had to use some of the principles in the intuitive eating. There's 10 principles. We had to use these principles with one of our counseling clients. So that was a lot of fun. And I still do that today. I think it's a wonderful way of helping people sort of break out of that diet cycle and really find a way of eating that is healthy, not only for their physical body, but also for their mental health as well. Just say no to trends and fads. This one is, I think, so important because most of these new diets, or the other thing I see a lot of is like superfoods. Most of these really don't have any research to back them up. Like I said, 95% of people who go on a diet really don't lose any weight at a year when you're looking at the benefits at a year, and they don't see any health benefits either. And so why do we keep doing these things? So just saying no is important. Remember to focus on changing habits. We're going to talk about some specific examples of things that we can do here in a minute, but it's important to just keep it small, focus on one thing at a time, and then keep building on that. So remembering that it's better to be consistently good rather than occasionally perfect. That's one of my favorite things. So let's look at a little bit more about what is intuitive eating. So we're focusing on paying attention to our body and our hunger. This one is really applicable for kids. Think about when you have a toddler, and they're at a birthday party and they have a piece of cake in front of them and they only eat a couple bites. And then they say, "Mom, I'm full." I say, "Wow, that's amazing self-control, right?" Well, no, they're not necessarily using self-control. They're simply listening to their body cues, right? And over time, we forget how to do that. So intuitive eating is getting back to basics and listening to your body and listening to your hunger. And when you are hungry, you eat and you stop when you are satisfied and when you are full. And so that's an important distinction, and we lose that, don't we, as we grow up. Also, learning to eat mindfully. How many of you eat while you're working or while you're watching TV or in your car? Okay, these are not good things. What ends up happening is our brain doesn't get the signals that we are full when it should, and so we end up eating too much. So getting back to that eating mindfully, not being distracted, actually enjoying food rather than feeling like it's the enemy or like it's going to make us fat. These are some of the principles that we talk about a lot when we talk about intuitive eating. All foods can fit. This is an important concept. So recognizing that all the food groups actually have benefits. They all have different nutrients. They do different things in our bodies. And so having a good variety is really important. We reject restricting and food rules. Okay, so the one I hear most often probably is that you shouldn't eat after 7. And I think that that is silly. So if you are hungry at 7:30, you should eat something, right? Next, move in ways that make your body feel good. So I'm rejecting the Nike slogan from the 90s, no pain, no gain. I also think that's silly. So there are plenty of ways that we can move our bodies that are fun and that make us feel good. Our bodies were meant to move. So we need to get back to finding some ways that we enjoy moving. And the last two, I think, are so important in this conversation. Let's cultivate thankfulness and respect for our bodies. So, yeah, that doesn't mean that we have to love everything about them, but isn't it amazing that you can walk around the block? Isn't it amazing that you can swim? Isn't it amazing that you can do all the things that you can do? And that kind of talk with our kids is actually really important too. That helps them not just want to sit on the couch and play the video games. It helps them want to move. So that respect and that thankfulness is really important. Also, remembering that bodies come in different shapes and sizes. This is important because, of course, our media does not do a very good job of showing us that different bodies are beautiful, right? I do think that's changing. Actually, the last couple of years, I've seen some good progress in that, but we still do have a long ways to go there. So what is a healthy diet? Let's spend a little bit of time talking about what does that look like? What does it look like to find balance? So number one, a healthy diet is balanced. So we want to think about how do we balance those nourishing foods with fun foods? Okay, I know vegetables are good for me, right? So how do I make them taste good? Maybe trying some new recipes. Getting kids involved with cooking is actually a wonderful way to help them enjoy cooking healthy foods. Being consistent is important. So, not eating perfectly, whatever that means, on, a couple days a week and then eating, not so good foods for us on the other days. We want to keep it consistent. So most days feeding our bodies with foods that make us feel really good. And don't restrict certain foods. And of course, the exception here is if you have an allergy. Obviously, if the food is actually going to make you sick, you should not eat it, right? Second, moderation. So paying attention to your hunger cues, learning when to stop and learning when you need to eat. So one of the things I counsel my clients here with is, what ends up happening so much of the time is we don't pay attention to our bodies until we are at the point where we are ravenous, right? So we get home from work, we're maybe so hungry. How many of you make a healthy choice when you're so hungry? No one, right? So that's not what we want to do. We want to stop, we want to pay attention to that hunger before it gets to the point where we feel like we can't make a good choice. Okay. And then lastly, variety. So it is important to include all the food groups. Like I mentioned earlier, each food group has different nutrients. And so when we have a variety, we actually have better assurance that we're getting all of the vitamins and minerals that we need. All right, so foods to focus on. Most of you know this, so this is just kind of a slide to reiterate what you probably already know. Fruits and vegetables, of course. Fresh and frozen are best, but canned can still count. And then choosing a variety every day. So one of my favorite challenges for my clients is to tell them to try to include the rainbow every single day. So do you have something red or orange? Do you have something yellow? Do you have something green? Do you have something blue? Do you have something white? And trying to get the rainbow every single day. That's a fun little challenge. And of course, the kids like that too. Think about how boring your plate would look if you didn't have any fruits and vegetables on it. It would literally be brown, right? Brown and white. So including those fruits and vegetables makes food look better, more appealing, and obviously they have some really good nutrition in them for us. Focusing on good for you fats like nuts and seeds and oils, and also fish like salmon and tuna. Those are really important parts of a healthy diet, is having those good fats. And then one of the other ones that is kind of up and coming, y'all have probably heard a little bit about probiotics. We're really finding a huge connection with gut health and mental health. So they talk about your gut being almost like a second brain. So with probiotics here, what we're doing is we are feeding our gut a consistent diet of good bacteria, okay? So we're talking about yogurt, kefir, other fermented foods like sauerkraut, or there's some naturally fermented pickles that you can find at certain stores, but doing a little bit of probiotics every day. There's actually some really good research showing that if our kids are having probiotics every day, they actually do better in school and they have lower incidence of depression. Okay, so again, we see the connection here with our physical bodies and our mental health. And then, of course, whole grains. I put this one in here because right now in our culture, we still think that carbohydrates are bad, don't we? They aren't. The problem is we do like to process our carbohydrates. We like to eat a lot of, crackers and cookies and granola bars and all of these things that are processed and they have a lot of added sugar. But when you're talking about a whole grain, like a whole wheat bread, a brown rice, maybe some fun grains like a quinoa or a bulgur, these can actually be really healthy, good grains to incorporate into your everyday balanced meal plan. All right, so what are some other specific ways that you can help? Practice healthy habits without going to extremes. Just say no to those bad diets. I know it's hard because all of the advertisement is so appealing, right? We think, oh, that's gonna fix me. That's gonna make me lose all this weight really fast without any work, right? Well, we know that that's not true, right? But it still lures us into its trap. Remember every day to be thankful for your body. Two, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this is something super practical on social media. Unfollow those influencers who are telling you about a quick fix or something that is really restrictive. Registered dietitians, nutritionists, I always have to put a plug in for us, right? Because that's what I do. We are the nutrition experts. If you or family or friend are having some struggles with this, then we are the people to go to. Also, don't believe everything you read or see. If it is too good to be true, it probably is, right? So just be careful with what you're watching, what you're listening to, and remember that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Jen, I've been trying not to break in too much, but that issue of unfollowing, and we're talking about young people, do you have some advice on how parents can sort of drive their children to unfollow the unhealthy things and follow the things that are healthy? Do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, Gary, you cut out there at the end. Hopefully it's not my.
No, I'm just wondering if you have advice for us on how to encourage your kids to
I think that's a
unfollow
great question.
social media things.
Yeah, so I think parents are obviously, feet on the ground in this situation, right? We're the ones that have the most influence over what our kids are doing. And so I think this is a really good question. I think a conversation with the kids, hey, I've noticed that this is happening. I've noticed you've been following this person. I noticed you've been following that person. I'm concerned about that. Can I help you go through your social media and maybe together let's go through some of those influencers who maybe are not a healthy influence on you. And I think it's important to kind of create that partnership. And if you can express your concern for them, they're much more receptive to that. So, not being angry about it, but saying, I'd like to really help you with this. I see that this is not helping you. Can we do this together, and making them a part of that? And I think that sets them up for success later on too, because then they'll have the skills to be able to recognize that and they'll be able to do that on their own. That's a great question. So yeah, and being supportive and encouraging to anyone struggling with dieting. So, and this one obviously looks different for different people. And sometimes it's important just to, maybe not make comments, maybe just be a good example. I think that's really important. One of the ladies I follow on social media, she's so great. She did a reel the other day on Instagram that the caption was, "When is it okay to comment on someone's weight?" And then she had this long list of bullets that basically said it's never okay to comment on someone's weight. And so I love that. I don't think that works ever. We end up hurting feelings or making them self-conscious, or so I think being a good example and then making it fun, especially with kids, making cooking fun, showing them how to incorporate some of those healthy foods. I think that's a really good practical way to help them out. So here are some resources. I do have a lot of free resources on my website. I have a lot of recipes. I have some good articles. So we mentioned the rainbow vegetables earlier. I actually have a list of red vegetables and yellow vegetables and purple vegetables. And so that can be helpful in that. I send that to a lot of my clients. Eatright.org is the website that you can go to find a dietitian. The book, Intuitive Eating. And then there is an eating disorders helpline where if you or someone you love, if you see some signs that they're not having a healthy relationship with food, that's a really good organization to reach out to. Okay, that's the end of that. And I'm right at a half an hour. Gary, if you want me to, I do have a couple of, in my other presentation, I have some examples of some clients that I've worked with who have found success in finding balance. If you want me to go through those, or we can just go to questions. You're on mute.
I thought I unmuted. Maybe Arturo and I both hit my mute button at the same time. Yeah, let's either do. We could have a couple of questions on this issue specifically. I saw Gina's iPhone on here. She doesn't have her camera turned on, but I wanted her to talk about a couple of things. There she is. And then we'll do questions of the whole group too, because I think I'm not seeing hands raised. So Gina, you and I talked a little bit earlier. Let me introduce. This is Gina King Beach. She is she wasn't listed in your program because she's so humble. She's a nurse, and she has worked in a COVID ICU unit ever since COVID started. And I watch her and I worry about her mental health sometimes because it's really stressful on healthcare workers. But Gina, you told me that you had spoken to some folks that might also have some links or some websites or something that would talk about health for people, and maybe you can even address some of the family healthcare issues that you've seen coming out of COVID. And then secondarily, if you could talk just a couple of minutes real quick about the Rotary iPad program that you started, actually. And Gina's not a Rotarian, but she came to me and talked to me about communication between people in the COVID unit and their families. And she had a great idea, and one of our Rotary clubs in Albuquerque has done that. So it kind of maybe just a little bit about a project, but tell us about those resources that you said might be available to help us with regard to health.
Well, hi, Gary. Thank you for letting me talk to your group. I do first want to thank Rotary and Jenn so much. In the early days of COVID, we were closed down. Families couldn't come in. People couldn't talk to their families. People were dying without family. And we had one iPad. We could do Skype on the unit, and we had 20 beds. And so I reached out to Gary, and Jenn brought me it was just a lifesaver. And we could put them in the hands of the providers, and then the doctor could go in the room, talk with the family on the iPad, show the patient. Sometimes the patients could talk, sometimes they couldn't, but people were never alone. And sometimes we would just leave an iPad in a room, and people could watch their family sleep, and they could be together. And you don't know how much it meant to families, to us nurses, to have a little physical contact. And because we weren't letting anybody in, and people like dying alone is just an awful thing. And you prevented that, and you allowed for for education and for families to stay in touch. And we still use the iPads because we still have some visitor restrictions. People can come in, but we still use them. And then people that live like in Socorro, New Mexico can, if they can't get there, we just put the iPad up and times, and people talk to their family. The doctor can talk to multiple family members at the same time with the iPad and understand. And without Rotary, that wouldn't have happened for us. So I want to thank you so very, very much for doing the iPads, and they're still in work, still in use. They've made so much difference to the people that I take care of, and I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. The is when we found out it was about empowering women and girls and what to talk about. My background is mostly ICU, and I've worked in labor and delivery, and I've done ICU and med surge, and I teach advanced life support. So I did tell Gary I'll do a CPR class for you guys if you want. And AED, anybody that wants to know that. And then I did 1 year as a school nurse, but I have friends that I work with kids. And one of my friends is a special ed teacher, and I asked her, can I interview your kids and ask them, what is it that they need? What do they see that their problems are? And so first I talked to Kat, and she goes to El Dorado, a high school in Albuquerque. And I said, what scares you most? What things are in that you see that are barriers to your success in school? And she said, well, I think I'm afraid about the availability of drugs that is to get caught up in it and not having
Gina,
education to know that they're bad.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, Gina. Can you say
not
that
hear me?
again? You broke up a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you just broke up a little bit. So.
Okay. Is it okay? So now can you hear me? Okay. So I talked to my friend, my little high school teenager, and I said, what scares you? And she says, it's the availability of drugs and my ability to not know what's right or wrong in a way. Like they bring you something, and like I've taken a pill before from my mom, and so that somebody brings something, and she says she's also gets scared about her body image. Is she too fat? And even though she plays volleyball, she's active, she's a good student, she's afraid of that. She's also said that she's afraid of not being perfect, of not getting an A. And so, I'm like, oh, it's okay if you don't get an A, do the best you can. But just hearing that from me doesn't completely help that. So her things were drugs, her body image, and not being perfect. So then I talked to her little sister who's in middle school. I'm like, what scares you? And Camilla, also the middle school kid, has a heart disorder and some slower learning. So I said, Camilla, what scares you in school? And she says, well, that I won't have friends, they won't include me, that I can't be in an after school program because I can't play volleyball good. And so I said, so your needs would be that you would have more after school programs or more inclusive programs so that you're not left out. And she said, sometimes I'm very sad. I cry because they don't, that I'm not included in things other people can be. And so when I talked to little Camilla, I thought, gosh, that says something I can do. Maybe we can help with after school programs. Maybe we can help with, helping other kids care about other kids. I think some of the things, I talked also then to their mom. I said, what are things we could do? What are some resources? And she said, most of the resources through the public schools give you a link. And I have some links to like mental health counseling or just any counseling, what's going on here, but they aren't in person. So sometimes it might be good if we had people in person that could help them. And there's also the things that we can use for other problems in schools. Like those problems are probably higher. They're not the lowest things, that the very bottom things we need on Maslow's hierarchy. I think like we need to feel safe. We need to have food. So some of those programs, there's like Roadrunner Food Bank, some refugee services that help people from that have just come to the country that need that. There's some housing services that give people housing if they do certain things. And I have a list. I can send it to Jen for the list that we compiled, me and Karin, the teacher. So that's kind of all I have to say. I don't know that was super great. I loved the nutrition. That's so helpful. And I'm hoping that there's things that we can do to help the kids, because when I ask them, what is your fear, that we can help them with the fears that they have.
I think that was a good place to start a discussion, and I know we have two Jens. We have Jennifer Dresser, who helped us with the iPad program, and Jenn Bryant, you know that. So I know Gina was thanking her. So if there's any confusion, that was that we have two Jens involved in this project. But you know what struck me when you said that one of the girls was worried about not having friends or something. Are you familiar with at any of the schools or anybody on the call about these the friendship benches or whatever? I know that young people have been working on those, where they have a bench at school, and if you're feeling lonesome or need a friend, you sit on the bench, and then other kids know that you want somebody to come and interact with you. That strikes me as something that Rotary clubs could really get involved in, to help create those at schools everywhere. But did the schools that they're at, Gina, are you aware of that? Or
I don't know. She didn't mention that there was one. She told me she had some friends, but that there's a lot of days she felt lonely. And so I don't know that they have one at Eisenhower. That might be a good place to start.
Good. Since we have a little time, we've got at least 10 or 15 minutes. Jenn Bryant, do you want to talk a little bit about a couple of your case studies that you said were good? I think that this would be a good time for that.
Gary,
Okay,
if I may, before we go into that, we have a
Yeah.
question from Sandra Carpenter. So,
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I meant to ask about that question, Sundar.
No, that's okay. Good morning, Miss Jenn. Appreciate all of the information. So my background is in early care and education. So I've run childcare centers for over 2 decades. I'm the current president of the New Mexico Childcare and Education Association. And even a lot of what Gina was just talking about, these young ladies are feeling, our staff feel that. They're adult women who are teachers and educators doing the hardest jobs, and their journey through COVID, because our programs stayed open for essential workers. Our even the centers going through RSV and the flu and everything this winter is very taxing. So I kind of have 2 questions, because my job is to guide them through their own mental wellness as best as I can as their leader. I read a book called Love Wellness, and some of the things you recommended were in that book. And I started a book club with my teachers a couple months ago, and I want them to read this book. And it talks about the importance of probiotics and foods with prebiotics, and thinking less about carbs and maybe more about glucose, or not. When you have celiacs, you try to avoid the word just
Gluten?
thank you
Yeah.
the word, it just jumped out of my brain. And eating the rainbow. So I wanted your thoughts on recommending this book for my teachers to read. And then my secondary question is, we're getting ready to do a big statewide conference to bring in owners, directors, the childcare workforce, and doing different tracks of training for them. And a lot of the trainings today, what we do is small children, and we get them 0 to 5, right? So I want to do a wellness track, and I didn't know if that was something you are willing to do, is come and speak at conferences. So those are my 2 questions.
Yeah, good questions. So obviously I haven't read the book, so I don't know if I can 100% recommend it, but from what you've told me, it sounds like it has some good some good information, some good action steps. I teach an entire series, 4 hours on gut health. So, today we just talked about the one tiny little piece of it with the probiotics. But let me just say real quick that prebiotics, which you mentioned earlier, those basically what they are is it's food for the probiotics. So you eat the probiotics, the good bacteria, but then to keep them in your gut, we sometimes call it to help them make a home in your gut, you feed them the prebiotics, right? So if you're feeding them well, and they stay there and they multiply and they diversify, and then you've got some good good bacteria in there.
The book went into that really well, in the microbiome of the gut and how the gut speaks to the brain, and how it broke down the biology in a very simple way, and then speaks to the female reproductive system, which so little research has been done. So
yeah, so it's all connected, right? But I think yeah, I mean, I think that focusing on the health and wellness piece of it, and but being careful that we don't let those words start to become some of these restrictive and fad diets, because that's happening too. There's so many things that are out there, you know, in the name of wellness that are actually just another flavor of one of those restrictive diets. So I like the idea of, you know, including the rainbow. Fiber is our most abundant prebiotic. So that's a really good nutrient to focus on. Am I getting enough fiber during my day? And then, of course, our recommendation of getting more fruits and vegetables flows into that naturally. And then also, Sandra, if you want to send me a message through my website, or I don't know if someone could send you my email, that's another option, but feel free to contact me and let me know details. I'm definitely willing to do conferences. It just kind of depends on if it fits in my schedule.
Jenn, if you like, you can put your email on the chat so that
oh yeah.
or the link to your website. That'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Sandra kind of slid by this a little bit, but one of the things that I've been trying to think about for this conference is, you know, concrete things that Rotary clubs can do or whatever. You talked about your book club, you know, people getting together and talking about nutrition. I mean, I would think that Rotary clubs could help support that conversation in the community, maybe by hosting either a book club or a Saturday morning coffee session or something where people get together and talk about those issues, good nutrition. I get the feeling that body shaming and nutritional issues and such are one of the biggest thing facing young women right now, and a lot of it comes from the internet, from social media. I hadn't thought about this too much for a while, but because it's been a number of years ago, but I had have friends whose daughter, who was 16 years old, committed suicide basically from peer pressure. I mean, it's such a huge thing for young women. I still feel sad about that. So if anybody on here wants to talk a little bit about what we can do, again, to just support those young women as Rotarians, what can we do to Gina talked about after school programs. I mean, are there things that any of you all are aware of that we could push out there to the world that are being helpful?
And Gary, I just want to comment on the presentations, and sorry to jump in, but you know, this is a challenge that we all face. You know, I was going to ask Jenn about, you know, intermittent fasting. You know, now it's a big thing, and you know, you lose the weight, you get it back, and it's kind of like a everyday battle. You know, I tried hundreds of diets throughout my life, and you know, so it's something that is keen for everybody. So thank you for sharing this important information. But like you said, you know, at a very young age, it's important to highlight how the most important is to be grateful to your body and to be thankful, and how that changes the perception that we have about food. And you know, but I just want to thank you and mention that it's something that applies to all of us, not only to, like, you know, young, old, or you know, just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, Jennifer, can you address that a little bit more? The intermittent fasting, I know is something that's kind of trendy right now.
Yeah,
And
sure. I know.
You really talked about it, but
yeah. Do you remember my my call to just say no? Okay, now there is an asterisk though with that intermittent fasting. There is actually some scientific research supporting intermittent fasting if you have insulin resistance. So that would be the one place. So maybe with pre-diabetes, or sometimes there are some insulin resistant signs even before pre-diabetes come. There's a skin condition called acanthosis nigricans that happens on the neck usually, and it's the neck is dark. And then there's a possibility of developing skin tags, and that's actually a really important sign of insulin resistance. So that can be a way to kind of, identify that. And then of course, getting your lab work done. I think that's important. But the intermittent fasting has been shown to be helpful with that, especially in men. So there's actually no research supporting that it's helpful in women. And actually it can be really harmful in young women and childbearing women. So I think it's important to make that distinction, that some of these diets that are coming out, again, let's remember that they're all fads. Let's kind of look for, is there actual evidence that these diets are helpful? And like I said, with intermittent fasting, the only population that it's shown to be helpful in is men who have insulin resistance.
Good. Other comments? We're not opposed to ending a little bit early. I know Vicki, it's been so nice to have you with us, and do you may be saying something in the closing session, but are you aware you have a lot more a broader experience with Rotary clubs? Are you aware of good food or nutrition programs directed at children and in other districts, or something that we could share with our district?
I thank you, Gary, and I don't think I'm saying anything in the closing, so let me say whatever I'm going to say now, right?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Jenn and Gina, for your input. And it seems to me that nutrition is maybe one of those things we don't talk about enough. And to Arturo's point, it affects all of us. So how useful would it be to have this kind of information even shared at our Rotary clubs or our Rotaract clubs in order to give us better information on how to be healthy and well during our lives? And then what I was thinking about is how we model for our children and our grandchildren. And if they see us doing the fad diets and some of the crazy things that we all do with trying to maintain healthy weight, just think about how powerful that is if we modeled good behavior and a better understanding of the being grateful for our bodies. So Jenn, I loved everything you said. My college roommate is a registered dietitian, so I really gravitate to what you're talking about. But I think that would be a big part of it, is the modeling. And what we know about empowering girls and women, and I've been very involved with human trafficking, is that confidence and that ability to have confidence in yourself. And Gina, you brought this up as well, that fear of being perfect and being judged by others, and this unrealistic this ideal of what people should look like at different ages, is such a detriment to the health, the mental health and the physical health, the spiritual health of girls and women. And so whatever we can do to help combat that through our own affirmations of young women and girls, through anything we can do on social media, and through our own modeling, I think is really powerful. So I really appreciate all the comments and the session today. Thank you.
Well said.
Let me say one more thing too, Gary. I didn't mention this earlier, but I do work part-time for the YMCAs here in central New Mexico. And we do, obviously, they have a lot of kids programs. There is a sports program that they do during the summers, a sports camp that has a nutrition component that I wrote. Many of their programs are free, or if the families are struggling financially, they can fill out a quick form and they can get assistance with programs. I do teach nutrition classes there also. Those are free for members too. So there are resources, but I think what you said, Vicki, is so important. Just being an example, that's where we start. And anyone, I mean, you think about the circles we have, right? We all have our circle of people that we influence. And so if we could each influence a couple people, and then those people influence a couple people, we really do have the power to stop some of this destructive behavior that's happening. but it starts with us, right? We have to be the example.
Yeah, very, very good points. Can I, real quick, I want to just reiterate, because Gina said this, and I hope it didn't pass by people. We're talking about going out and doing programs. Gina said she's willing to do a program on Gina, say it, AEDs and
Oh, yeah. CPR, AED.
CPR.
Yeah.
That she can do that in half an hour at a Rotary Club, and I'm sure there are other people that can too. But we've seen examples of how important that is and can be, and just to let people know that Gina is a resource that can point you towards that for your club in the Albuquerque area, at least. If you, yeah.
Gary and Sandra
Can I be-
commented. Oh, I'm sorry, Jenna. I just want to mention that Sandra commented the possibility to including the topic on RILA for the upcoming camps, the nutrition, and I think that'll be a very important component for that.
Very true. I'm sorry, Gina,
I
go ahead.
wanted- I've actually been reading a book that helped me with confidence, and it's a book by Steve Magnus called Do Hard Things, and it comes from a kind of a coaching standpoint, but I gave it to one of the little girls that I'd interviewed, and she said it helped her because she said she went to school with confidence saying, I can do hard things. And so I'm not telling everybody go out and read it, but it was a good book. It's called Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus, and giving kids confidence that they need to do nutrition or to say no to those things that are bad for you, like just not eating, because I do hard things and I can do this.
Good. Well, any other comments? Otherwise, I think we're in very good time, but anything else for the good of the order, as we would say? I don't have my bell here for all of you Rotarians to ring the bell, but I think probably we could end the recording, Arturo, and we can send people back